Okay, so it looks like that might be connecting now. Welcome if anyone's joining right from the beginning. Just double checking that the streaming setup's working before we get going. Making sure that the sound is coming through clearly as well. Let me know in the comments if you can hear me. And welcome. I've been putting together a series of training videos looking at the topic of managing different personality types, particularly in the context of workplace conflict. I'm a workplace mediator, and so I'm often called in to run a mediation, and frankly, a lot of the time what's driving the conflict is what you would think of as different kinds of personality. People are just butting heads, they've got different norms and expectations in terms of what they want and expect from the other, etc. And a lot of these things are unsaid. It's, to some extent, I think, subconscious what we expect and how we react to situations. To some extent, we can't change that, and we're never going to fully understand it either. So there's always this vague kind of reciprocal pattern going on between the people that are involved. For me, I don't like to put labels on people. I don't like to take too much of a diagnostic approach when it comes to workplace conflict. But I do think that there are a number of different functional frameworks or functional understandings of people that we can use when it comes to conflict. And for me, the best way to think about workplace conflict and personality is using the big 5 personality characteristics. So I've got on the screen there, this is the big 5 and what it actually looks like. The label comes from those across the top there, the different columns. We've got neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experience, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. The cheat that I used to use when I was studying for this and doing exams was OCEAN, is the acronym OCEAN. So some different models of personality use a framework where there are different labels at each end of the different continuums. You could be extroverted on one end and introverted on the other, thinking on one end and feeling on the other, if you think about Myers-Briggs, for example. Whereas for the big 5, it's not so much that you're this or this, it's more that people are either high or low in each of those 5 different dimensions. So you could be high in neuroticism, high or low in extroversion, high in openness or low, higher or lower in agreeableness, and conscientiousness. I think there can be some benefit to talking about the differences at that level. Like if you've got a business partner, for example, who's much more tolerant of risk than you are, you're much more conservative and tend to take more of a cautious approach, saying to them something like, I wonder if we've got differences in terms of how we think about risk, or how open we are to change, or how open we are to uncertainty. That could be a way of introducing the topic and opening up a conversation with that person to talk about it. And I like it because it's this mutual and neutral way of framing things. We've got different expectations here. I wonder if we've got different tolerances for this kind of an issue. I wonder if we were preemptively assuming that this was what was going to happen, when actually, if we pause and think about it, we actually had completely different perspectives here. So that level is helpful, the neuroticism, the extroversion, the openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, etc. Like I notice my wife is much more conscientious than me, so I let her know that I'm really making an effort to tidy up after myself, even though it might be that in a few instances every single day I forget and leave something lying around. Or maybe she's annoyed at me for being stressed out all of the time. And I could say, I recognize that I'm higher in neuroticism than you. I am more prone to worry, to overthinking those issues. I get where you're coming from. Let's think about how we can manage this in the context of our relationship. So it's this mutual and neutral way of opening the conversation, and then you can decide effectively how assertively to deal with it. In some situations, it might be quite direct. Could you please stop doing this? I know that this is the norm for you, this is the way that you naturally respond, but it's creating these difficulties for me. Like, I want you to stop doing this, or change this, or start doing this. Or it might be that you realize that there's this difference, but you decide to take more of an accommodating kind of approach. Just go with the flow. There's a lot of these differences where it's probably not worth dying on that hill, if you know what I mean. So if your boss is, what would be an example, like, very low in agreeableness, they give you very direct negative feedback, and that's difficult for you to manage. Maybe you could talk about the way that they could communicate differently, given that that's not something that you've experienced in other jobs that you've been in or something similar. But for me, the real benefit of this model is when we begin to think about those subcategories. So you can see within each of those bigger dimensions, neuroticism, for example, we've got the subcategories of anxiety, I'll just make it a little bit bigger so you can see it on the screen there. Hostility and anger, depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness or immoderation, and vulnerability to stress. Within extroversion, we've got the subcategories warmth, gregariousness, the sort of person that likes to be the life of the party, to crack jokes, to tell stories, etc. Assertiveness, how directly they tend to deal with conflict and communication. The activity level that they like, some people who are extroverted, they really like to be active, they like to be busy, they like it when there's a lot of people around and a lot of action going on. How likely they are to seek excitement type of activities, like skydiving or rock climbing, or even going to a new restaurant or going to a different part of town that you're not familiar with. And then we've got positive emotion and cheerfulness. And so you can see under openness, we've got the different subcategories: fantasy, preference for aesthetics, importance of artistic interest, etc. Feelings and emotionality, both the proneness of somebody to experience strong emotions, as well as the ability to understand and tolerate those strong emotions in other people. Adventurousness, the liking and tolerance for exploration. With that, obviously, comes a tolerance of uncertainty as well, and an interest in novelty. We've got preference for ideas, focus on intellectual concepts. Some people really love philosophy or linguistics or etymology or something similar. Other people just don't really care. They're much more methodical. They care about particular processes and improving their skills or whatever else it might be. And then your values, like, are you more psychologically liberal? Do you think everybody should have the right to make their own decisions? Or is there some arguments for consistency or guardrails within society, within a team, within an organization? These same trends would tend to play out across multiple different dimensions in your life. We've got agreeableness, trust. Are you straightforward? Do you tell the truth? Altruism. Do you like to help other people out? Do you do things out of the kindness of your heart? How important is compliance, cooperation, doing the right thing, ticking all of the boxes? Your attitude to success, do you tend to be more modest? Do you prefer to just do your work well in the background? Or do you like public acclaim and public recognition? And then sympathy or tender-mindedness. My son knows that I'm very high in this one, and he often uses that to tug at my heartstrings when he wants an extra scoop of ice cream or something similar at night. And then within conscientiousness, finally, you would see differences in competence, self-efficacy, the importance of self-efficacy as well as the level of perceived self-efficacy. Orderliness, do you like to be very organized and keep things very neat and tidy? Dutifulness, do you do things out of obligation for other people? Do you show up to that family event even though you'd prefer not to be there just because others would be annoyed that you weren't there? Achievement, striving, and how driven you are. Self-discipline and willpower, and cautiousness or deliberateness, deliberation. So it would be possible to have differences where somebody's high in one of these areas and low in others. Instead of saying to my wife, I know that you're very conscientious, which I don't know if she really often knows what I mean by that, I might say something like, I know for you it's really important to be organized. You hate it when the fridge or the cupboard or the weekend plans are completely chaotic, and that makes sense given the fact that you're reasonably time poor and you don't want to spend your time re-tidying things that you've already cleaned. Or it might be that sense of obligation and duty. It's really important for you not to let your family down. I can see where you're coming from there. At the same time, I'd prefer not to go to this barbecue for this particular reason, but let's go to that other thing that's coming up at the end of the month. But I don't know, what stands out to you looking through that list? Are there particular differences that you're observing between yourself and someone you work with? Yourself and your partner? Yourself and your children? It gives us that open door to talk about these topics, doesn't it? So I'll just have a sip of water there. And what I'm going to do next is to explore 3 different case studies involving workplace conflict and talking about how we could use this big 5 personality dimensions to discuss it and how we might do that. Obviously, this is just my thoughts. This isn't about right and wrong, but it can be helpful just getting an external party's perspective on these kind of issues, especially if you're someone that's experienced something similar. So let's have a look at the first one here. Sarah works in customer service for an online retail company. She's patient and always tries to find flexible solutions to keep customers happy. One regular client, Mark, is direct, demanding, and expects immediate results with zero exceptions. During a recent call, Mark became aggressive when Sarah explained she couldn't override a strict return policy. Sarah felt attacked and flustered, while Mark accused her of being unhelpful and slow. The conversation ended badly, with Mark threatening to take his business elsewhere. Sarah now dreads his calls and hesitates to answer her phone when his number appears. The tensions continue, affecting her confidence with other difficult customers. So if we go back to the previous slide with those different aspects of the personality, what jumps out to you there? How would you describe Mark, and how would you describe Sarah? Which are the differences there? And if Sarah did decide to talk to Mark about this, how could she do that? I suppose one obvious one would be the level of assertiveness that Mark is displaying. Sarah might say something like, "Look, Mark, I know that you can be quite direct in your communication. And the challenge for me is that you're often giving me a short time frame to get back to you when there are a number of different decision makers that need to be involved if we can make an exception to this kind of thing. I've explained to you the policy and the fact that I can't make any exceptions. There's no loophole that I can find here. There's a level of consistency that they expect from us in this organization, and unfortunately at some point we're often bound by the policy. But what I can do is go and talk to my manager and see if there might be some other option that I've missed or something else that they can consider. In the meantime, could I get your assurance that you know that I'm working on it and we could organize a time where I can give you a call tomorrow morning?" So I'm saying to him, "You're very assertive," or "You're very time poor," or "You're not very cautious. It probably seems to you like, why am I making such a big deal out of this? Surely there's something that we can do. I just wanted to let you know that this is what I'm doing in that respect. These are the steps that I'm taking, etc." And so if Sarah tends to be more of a sense of duty and obligation kind of person, or maybe their organization has a high focus on order, consistency, policy, and procedure, that might be a way of Sarah explaining the constraints that she's working with. It might be that Mark's prone to showing hostility and anger, and so Sarah could even say something like, "Look, I understand that there's a level of frustration here. You've dealt with myself as well as a number of other different team members, and it makes sense why you're feeling pretty irritated that this hasn't been fixed by now. I'm going to do my best to see what I can do to help. Can I get your assurance that you're doing your best to keep the volume levels manageable? And of course, we don't tolerate abuse, that kind of behavior. If that happens, I'll let you know, but in that case, I do need to end the call. How does that sit with you? Does that make sense?" So I'm kind of saying to him again, it's probably fine with you in your culture to display anger, to be very emotional, to raise your volume, to interrupt someone when they're speaking. And I could say, this isn't the way that I normally approach these conversations. It's causing me this difficulty. Like I could say, it's challenging for me to explain the full level of detail that's needed when you won't let me finish what I'm speaking before jumping in. Could you let me finish what I'm saying first? And then, of course, I'll give you every chance to respond as much time as you need, etc. So there's no right and wrong. I think each Sarah, if you were in Sarah's position or I was in Sarah's position, we might take a slightly different approach. But yeah, they would be some of the levels I think that we could begin talking about this one. So let's have a look at the second case study there. Here I think is a good one because we've got a staff member that's stuck between two very strong personalities in their team. So as a team manager in a digital agency, Alex oversees two senior designers, Jordan, bold, outspoken and competitive, and Riley, quiet, methodical and harmony-seeking. Jordan frequently criticizes Riley's conservative designs in meetings, calling them safe and boring. Riley responds by withdrawing and delivering work late to avoid conflict. Alex has tried to mediate, but both sides feel unsupported. Recent project delays have increased pressure from senior leadership. Team meetings are now awkward and unproductive. The clash between two strong personalities continues unresolved, making it harder for Alex to maintain team performance and morale. So what jumps out at you about this one? We've got Alex in between Jordan and Riley. And Jordan is bold and outspoken and competitive, and Riley's quiet, methodical, and harmony-seeking. So let's go back to that slide where we've got the big five, including the subcategories. Whoops. Sorry, there's a bit of delay. I've gone one further back so you can see a quote from a different seminar that I'm preparing from Robert Greene there. So this is that big five. And where would you notice the differences between Riley and Jordan from your perspective? I suppose we could talk about cautiousness or deliberateness. Maybe we could meet with them both and say, Riley, I know you like to give these kind of options some thought before rushing into any decisions, and you want to make sure that you've evaluated each of the options that we should consider before finalising things. Jordan, it seems like for you this can be frustrating at times because there's some situations where there's an obvious path that you should go down, and so all of this unnecessary delay is meaning that you're not able to deliver the project to the client as quickly as you normally would be, or something similar. So I can understand each of your perspectives. How are you going to manage this moving forward? I have to confess that as a mediator, I don't usually like to be too involved in the solution implementation, so to speak. My role really is to help them talk it through, to develop a plan, to explore all of the options, etc., and then come up with an agreement where possible. So I use the language of, how are the two of you going to figure this out? I know if you're more of a collaborative-minded kind of manager, though, you might say, how can we manage this within the team? Or what do each of you need in terms of support from myself and other members of the organization, etc.? So it's not right and wrong. It's just that they've got these differences. Maybe it's the achieving, striving thing, like Jordan's really aiming to be the top performing team in the organization or something similar, and Riley couldn't care less about that. Or maybe Jordan has that tendency to cut corners and the sense of duty is not so important to him. He doesn't mind disappointing a particular client when there's other important ones that he could get more business from. Whereas Riley might think, no, we've promised that this is what we were going to deliver. We should do it. So if Alex decides to talk about that, he might say something like, look, I imagine that you've got different perspectives on what it means to say no, what it means to ask a client for a delay, what it means to miss a deadline. Could we talk about each of your perspectives and then how you can manage this moving forward? What do you think? How would you deal with that one if you were in Alex's position? Would you talk with one of them separately or both of them separately? Or would you start by running a joint meeting, a kind of an informal mediation? I think for me, I probably would begin by talking about it with them together. And this is something that I've changed. I'm in my mid-40s now, and I've had much more experience in management and leadership. Early on in my first manager's roles, I certainly would have split them up and talked to them separately. The challenge I think there is that people might tell you something that they don't share in front of the other person, or they put it differently, which always puts you as the manager in a tough spot. As a mediator, we often manage impartiality, like it's important that the mediator doesn't take sides with either of the parties. But what we're actually managing is perceived impartiality. Yes, it's important that mediators don't take sides, but it's important that the parties in the mediation are confident that the mediator's not taking sides. So as the manager, if you've had the initial conversation separately with each of them, I wonder about what happens in the back of their mind. Jordan's sitting there thinking, oh yeah, what's Riley bloody told you about me? And what that means is that they're much more prone to escalate, much more self-protective, of course, when it comes to finally meeting together in the room. Whereas for me these days, I probably would talk about it together. I'd say, look, I know these aren't the easiest conversations to have, but I'd like to talk about how the dynamics have been within our team recently. I've noticed a couple of things and I might be off the mark here, but I'm concerned that there might be something that's contributing to a negative working relationship. And I mean, the two of you have worked well together previously, so it's possible that I'm rushing in. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I did want to give the two of you a chance to talk it through. And if there's something that I can do or some other tweaks or changes that we can make within the team, then I'm perfectly happy to consider that. So I'm not saying you're wrong or I want to get to the heart of why we've been missing deadlines or whatever, or even too strongly saying there is a big problem here. But I am saying this is a concern that I've got based on some of these things that I've noticed. I'm not making conclusions, I'm not making preemptive judgments, but it is an important thing that we explore or talk through together, how we'll communicate within the team or how our working relationships will function in the midst of the different like KPI requirements or deliverables or whatever the language is that you use within your team to talk about the actual output itself, the work itself. Might be in project management, or who knows, it would be different, wouldn't it, depending on the kind of context that you're in. So let's have a look at the third case study. Here we've got a different situation involving two business partners who are in conflict. So I'll read it first and then we can flick back to that slide with the big five and see if there's something that jumps out to us. 2 years ago, Taylor and Sam founded a small marketing consultancy together. Taylor is ambitious, decisive, and focused on rapid growth and taking calculated risks. Sam prefers careful planning, steady progress, and maintaining work-life balance. Their differences have grown sharper. Taylor wants to hire aggressively and chase big clients, while Sam worries about cash flow and overextending. In their latest heated discussion, Taylor accuses Sam of holding the business back, while Sam called Taylor reckless. Decision-making has stalled on several key opportunities. The partnership is strained, productivity has slowed, and neither partner is willing to compromise yet. The conflict remains ongoing. So what jumps out at you about that one? Have you been in a position like this where you've had a business partner and you had different priorities, etc.? And how did you manage it? I know these can often be some of the most difficult conversations for people to have. The unfortunate reality is that we often spend more time with our business partners than we actually do with our wife or our husband, or sometimes our children in different phases of our life. So we spend a lot of time with these people, and there's a lot at stake. You've invested real money, blood, sweat, and tears a lot of the time as well. And you know, when people go through a divorce or a separation, they grieve, and they kind of grieve not just the relationship, the marriage that they had, but what they thought they were going to have moving forward. How they imagine the big family milestones, the big events, their children's graduations or marriages or whatever. So when someone breaks up with them, they don't just lose what they've had previously in their history. It's like a loss of their hopes and dreams or what they had in mind the future might look like. And I think the business partner conflict often is also very similar. There's just so much tied up in this. And if you've invested early, taken on board risk, done work on spec because there was a likelihood later to generate a profit, there's a real risk of jumping out too early. And I think what happens for a lot of business partners is what's called the sunken cost fallacious reasoning error. They think that because they've already committed this much money or this much time, they can't just walk away from it now. So that's one of the challenges when it comes to this, is there's no easy plan B. Unwinding or separating these kind of ventures is often a very expensive and tedious process, and it's not always possible. So let's think about Taylor and Sam then, and what might be going on here. We've got Taylor, who's ambitious, decisive, focused on rapid growth and calculated risks. Sam prefers careful planning, steady progress, and maintaining work-life balance. So if we flick back to the slide with the different personality factors on it, let me go back. There's a delay in this, I'm sorry. There we go. So what differences jump out to you? I suppose the tolerance for risk would be the first one. We've got that down in the bottom right there of cautiousness. Maybe Sam could say something like, look, I am prepared to be flexible. I am prepared to discuss these new ventures or these options that we have been considering. At the same time, I want to make sure that we protect our backs. We don't want to overextend ourselves, make ourselves vulnerable, and then something goes pear-shaped, which might not necessarily be our fault. It might not be something that we can control, but that puts me in an uncomfortable spot when we've got all of our eggs in one basket. So could we talk about a compromise here? So he's not saying you're wrong to want to take the risk. It's just we've got different levels of tolerance here. And I might say something like, I'm naturally more cautious, or the role that I've played within the business until now has been somewhat conservative. And I think that works well with your higher tolerance for risk or whatever else it might be. There are others in conscientiousness that you could also talk about though, like the achievement striving side of things. It's possible that one partner really wants to grow, and so for them, although they're successful already right now, it's not enough. They're very hungry, whereas the other business partner might be perfectly happy with how things are right now. I think more specifically though, there's probably some nuance in each of their perspectives. So let's imagine that Sam met and said, look, I wanted to talk about our goals. What are we actually aiming for? How do we imagine the next 5 or 10 years playing out? As well as work, what are the other priorities for you in terms of family or yourself or something else? And then he could do the same. And it might be that they talk about, so for one of them that has young children at the moment, they might say, well, I'm prepared to accept that for the next year or two, we just keep things more or less as they're going. We keep the wheels turning, and that's perfectly fine with me. If you decide that you want to finish at 5 and go home to spend time with the kids, I understand that. I can choose my own hours. We're both grown-ups. We can figure all of that stuff out as we go. After 2 years, though, I would like your commitment about the fact that you would be willing to consider moving forward with this project at that stage. I mean, sometimes we would say, I want your agreement that we're doing this later on if I can tolerate what you're asking for right now. So maybe just exploring that within the context of time, that this isn't always a permanent arrangement, that maybe they could have one of their needs met for this short amount of time and then have their other needs met in this other way. Or maybe there's different areas within the business that they could focus on. And one who is more achievement striving might focus on an area where they can do that. They can kick those goals. They can get the public recognition if that's what they're looking for, or the, security if that's what they're looking for, or something else. It's possible that it's about self-efficacy, like one of the partners feels like they're doing more than their fair share and they want to feel like everyone's standing on their own 2 feet. Or maybe it's an issue of trust. Maybe one of the partners is a little bit flippant with the truth. They exaggerate, they bend the truth a little bit, or they're not always fully transparent. Well, that might be something that the other partner finds incredibly confronting. Like, you said this to me, I take you at your word, and now you're doing something different. It makes it really difficult for me to feel like we're on solid ground when you're giving me those promises, or we're going through these kind of related issues here. Again, this isn't about right and wrong. It's a helpful way in my mind to open the door to have that kind of a difficult conversation in the mutual and neutral kind of way. And then we would decide how forcefully we want to negotiate, how much we offer solutions and we're involved in their implementation, and how much, as the professional mediator in me often does, is saying, how are the two of you going to figure this out? What's going to work for you moving forward? Given the fact that you've got these different perspectives, and that makes sense, given you different sets of experience, what are you going to do? What tweaks, what supports, what structures might be needed? How will you know that you're on the right track? And what will you do next time round if you run into the same kind of issue? That's all we can do. It's a little bit of planning, and I think the more specific and detailed that people can be about the steps that they're going to take, the more likely that they are to follow them. And then it's about preemptive planning. Like I said, how are you going to manage this in the future? I'm a mediator. I'm not always there in the meetings moving forward. So how will the two of you manage this? What will you do when the emotions get heated, or you need to talk about one of these topics where you've got really night and day kind of perspectives on what will work there? And there might be some solutions they could consider, like we'll take turns, or you can make decisions about this and I'll do something else. Or if you can give me this other thing that's important to me, then I'll give you that's important to you. But sometimes just mentioning and naming it is an intervention in itself, isn't it? Just saying to them, it's not always easy to get along with the people that you work with. I think we underestimate sometimes the challenges of working with people. We're not rational, we're not consistent, we take things personally. There's always going to be that level of reactiveness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't repair relationships as needed and find the language to have some of these difficult conversations as we need to as well. Well, I hope that it's been helpful for you. If it has, please consider giving a thumbs up. Put a comment down below if you've got any questions or something in particular has stood out to you. And stay tuned. Please feel free to subscribe if you would like more of these kind of resources for dealing with workplace conflict. Bye for now.